Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Munro Live. I'm Jordan Arocha, Director of Commercial here at Munro, and with me is Thadd Kopp. So Thadd is one of our lead engineering consultants here at Munro Associates, and today we're going to be covering this Zero motorcycle, so the DSRX, pretty cool bike that we'll get into in a little bit. Now, before we get into the review, just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what Munro is, right? So you may think that we just review vehicles or, do sort of general media informational type stuff, but in fact what Munro does is we'll do that, yes, right, looking at videos, what we like, what we didn't like, but really and truly we're looking at more the technical side of things. So what we're seeing in terms of the materials used, the cost and weight associated, different manufacturing processes, and kind of try to dig into why a given OEM or manufacturer did what they did, with those other constraints kind of being the bounds or the litmus test in which we look at different things. So we're going to talk about a little bit what we liked, what we didn't like, some pros and cons that we saw in this bike, but also as we're going through that, kind of tie in the manufacturing piece and some of those engineering trade-off decisions that we saw. So I spent a little bit of time on the bike, but Thadd definitely spent quite a bit more time on the bike. So I guess with that being said, Thadd, as you've got some time behind the handlebars here, what are your initial thoughts on this, right? Obviously electric versus ICE, a lot of differences.
Right. Yeah, just a little bit about myself. My hobby is just buying underloved motorcycles and working on them and riding on them until I'm bored and then flipping them. So, I've been through at least a half a dozen motorcycles in the last 5 years. So I go through a lot of motorcycles. But this is my first time on an electric motorcycle. And I honestly just didn't have high expectations for liking it. There's so much about riding an ICE motorcycle that's part of the experience, the sound, shifting and all of that. And but riding this bike has really grown on me, sincerely, quite a bit, to the point where, honestly, out of all the motorcycles I've ridden, I think this might be the pick of the litter. It's very, very smooth. It's very, very well balanced. It's 544 pounds, which, as far as motorcycles that I've ridden, it's on the heavier end. Relative to a lot of motorcycles that other people have ridden, it's not. But for me, this is on the heavier end. But the center of gravity's lower in the bike, and it's just so well balanced that I never once felt like it was a heavy motorcycle.
Yeah, Thadd, I'm with you in the weight balance. Just in the short time that I was on it, like I really and truly anticipated the bike to be very kind of cumbersome and heavy, just given the absolute mass, right? Over 500 pounds is heavy for a sport bike, something along these lines. And I think that low CG really did help keep the thing balanced. Felt light in the seat, right? Didn't feel like I was fighting the bike around corners, or fighting to keep it up, right? It seemed pretty stabilized.
Right, absolutely. Throttle's extremely smooth. I never once felt like I was surprised, like it was just getting away from me, even with the amount of power and torque that this thing has. So this motorcycle is 100 horsepower and 166 foot-pounds. So it's by any measure a fast motorcycle, but I never felt like it was just getting away from me. It's very predictable, very linear response to throttle inputs.
Yeah. So and I agree with you. It was very, very tamed, very, very predictable. I was honestly like a little bit nervous, even kind of growing up in the motocross world.
Right.
I was like, is this going to be, two-stroke on steroids and just want to flip skyward? But it was, to your point, there's a lot of forgiveness. Granted, I kept it in rain mode for my first ride there. A lot of throttle forgiveness, a lot of throw, right? And the torque delivery was very smooth. So I was really happy to see that. So I guess that kind of going from the front to the back, as we go through here, maybe let's talk a little bit about just the bike's architecture, how that compares to maybe an ICE counterpart, and then also, maybe for a electric version, maybe some of the decisions that they made or the things that they were able to get away with because of it.
Sure. I guess the things that are pretty similar, like brakes and suspension, maybe we can talk about those first, because I don't see a lot of differences between this and an ICE bike in those components necessarily. The brakes up front are 4-piston caliper, 320 millimeter discs. The brakes in the rear are 2-piston caliper, 265 millimeter discs. you know, I looked up some of the specs at bikes that would be in this similar category, like Harley Davidson Pan America, a Triumph Tiger 900 or 1200, some of the BMWs, and they're all pretty similar. There might be slight differences in the disc diameter, but no significant differences. Similarly on the suspension, up front, it's a Showa 47 millimeter front suspension with fully adjustable compression, rebound, and damping. And in the rear, it's a 46 millimeter Showa suspension with fully adjustable compression, rebound, and damping. Again, if you look up specs for motorcycles in a similar category, they're all going to be pretty similar to that. No significant differences there. Obviously, everything between the throttle and the wheels is completely different. So that's now, and even this, I guess I didn't cover the chassis itself. It's trellis frame, trellis frame. That's fairly standard design, I think, architecture. So, but going to the powertrain, obviously everything between the throttle and the wheels is different. So we talked a little bit on the intro video covering some of the differences between an electric motorcycle and an ICE motorcycle, kind of an overview, but just to cover it again, this is the battery. So it's 17.3 kilowatt hours. It's air cooled. This is the motor, again, 100 horsepower, 166 foot-pounds. Also air cooled. All the power electronics, you can see some of them up in here with finned for cooling, are all underneath the seat.
And maybe that's a good point to stop, right? You see the cooling fins, although they look pretty neat, right? A lot of those are all heat exchangers, right? So that's providing more surface area for this battery, the motor, the power electronics, all those things to cool themselves naturally. So as you mentioned, Thadd, and it's, you know, you may have kind of glossed over it if you're listening to this, but he said air cooled everything. That's key because every one of these vehicles, and no exceptions thus far, except for the like PHEVs and HEVs out there, but for full battery electric vehicles in the North American market, the vast majority of those are liquid cooled. They use ethylene glycol and or refrigerant-based systems, right? Often with chillers that use both the refrigerant and the ethylene glycol. This doesn't have any of that, meaning this is fully air-cooled. And they can get away with that in large part because they've got two sides exposed to air. Well, really, you know, all sides, if you consider some air gap between lower shield shrouds, the top end, and so forth. They've got a lot of exposure for heat sinks to really manage that thermal part of it. And then the other thing is if you look at the fundamental difference between a bike and a car, most of the time you're not taking this out in 0 degree Fahrenheit weather, right? This is almost exclusively temperate weather, conditions and where you're going to be taking this out. And so although we say cooling systems, right, they're both heating and cooling. And so if you don't have the necessity to heat in the same way that a conventional, BEV would or a vehicle would, then it also affords you the ability to omit some of that. So it makes a ton of sense on a motorcycle why you would get rid of a lot of that. And I suspect in a next-gen iteration of a Zero or other OEMs going towards a BEV system, I would assume that they would also err towards the air-cooled side of things, right? And beyond that, right, it's pretty clean, right? There's not a lot else to take in. You're seeing the majority of both aesthetics and structures outside of some charging monuments here, some of the power electronics which are tucked up underneath, but you're seeing the majority of the architecture and structure here. So relatively simple by all standards.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. So as we look at the construction of the frame, right, we've got a tube frame, right? There's no major stampings, there's no major castings outside of what we're seeing directly on the battery and the motor housings. And so when I look at these, that generally speaking, one, it's great for structures, right? A tube is an incredibly efficient structure, meaning that you don't need to do a lot. They're going to be very strong, very tight package. However, this type of architecture is not great for high volume manufacturing. if you consider from a alignment, a GD&T perspective, right, fixturing all of these things with a tube frame, although, you know, millions of bike manufacturers do it around the world today, it is not the easiest thing in terms of fixturing. We often talk in terms of two-way and four-way slots, alignment, GD&T.
Right.
It's very difficult to do all of that when you're dealing with almost exclusively curved or spline surfaces. And so it's not as conducive for high volume, but from a structural perspective and a weight perspective, it's pretty efficient.
Yes.
So I guess moving rearward, you know, and looking at the motor coming to the back wheel, you know, most of the stuff is very, very common to what we would see in an ICE application, but I know, Thadd, you and I were just chatting briefly looking at the rear end here. Can you talk about maybe some of the differences in this like rear sprocket and belt area versus maybe an ICE counterpart in terms of size?
Yes. Yeah, you know, there are belt-driven motorcycles, obviously. A lot of the ICE motorcycles are not belt-driven. So this is a 25 millimeter wide Gates carbon drive belt. You can see the rear pulley is pretty large relative to what a sprocket would be on an ICE bike. So on an ICE bike, maybe that diameter of the sprocket would be 2/3 or so the diameter of that belt. And instead of attaching directly to the wheel out here, there would likely be some sort of a hub adapter to attach the sprocket to the rear wheel.
Yeah.
So it would look different. It would be a different ratio between the front and the rear, but it's a pretty similar concept overall.
Sure. From a cost reduction perspective, right, if I was going to have a discussion with Zero, just looking at the outside of the bike, the one thing that I do see is a lot of covers, a lot of fairings, which I would say competitively speaking, even in the ICE space, is not atypical, right, to see breakups and cut lines here, right, but in areas of in the back especially, right, where we've got a lot of closeouts, a lot of different panels around the lamp and stuff, yes, maybe it would be a design change, but I don't see a reason immediately why a lot of these things can't become one single larger molded piece, right? I've got a separate flexible section right here for my turn signal, and then I've got a separate injection molded shroud that EPDM likely, you know, sort of bush section goes into, and then I've got a separate grained, potentially painted, I'd have to look for overspray, cover over the top of that, right? You can kind of see where we're going with this. There's a lot of complexity, and what fundamentally is a fairly simple assembly here, and so could be that they've got some opportunities here.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, but other than that, I don't know, just kind of giving my 2 cents on the bike. It was really exciting to get behind it. You know, getting on an electric bike, obviously all the points you mentioned, the differences in an ICE, I found myself kind of almost freaked out for a second because I went to grab for the clutch about 100 times and then realized it wasn't there. So that was an odd sensation. And then, you know, also kind of hunting for the shift lever. That wasn't there either.
Those muscle memory habits are not going to go way fast.
Right. But I think even in that, you know, a little bit of time where I rode it, you know, I can absolutely see how you could get used to this quickly. The regen was nice and natural. It didn't really want to throw me over the handlebars. And it also gave me enough confidence to the point where I wasn't, you know, hammering on the brakes. So I think overall, in terms of the calibration with the mode that I was riding in, I was pretty impressed.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The modes step up from rain mode to eco mode to standard mode to sport mode to canyon mode. You can read about all the differences between those modes, but there's basically, they vary the aggressiveness of the throttle and the amount of regen. And but I've ridden in all of those modes, and in all of those modes, the both on the on throttle propulsion mode and in the regen mode, it's just extremely smooth. I would say the calibration's great.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
What do you think of the color?
The color is kind of cool, actually. It's for some reason my mind kind of goes back to my like high school or college days where I was playing Halo probably too often, and it's got some of those Halo color schemes going on it. But it's cool. It's not too flashy. It's subtle, but it's still aesthetically pleasing. You know, it's not like a a bright yellow or something wild, but I like it. It's different. What are your thoughts?
My reference goes back a little further than Halo. You know, my wife said it looks like the avocado green refrigerator from the 70s. And that might sound like a put down, but I actually love that refrigerator. You know, and those kind of retro-y colors are coming back a little bit for sure. And I think it falls in with that. It's not it's not a pea green, it's not a flashy Kawasaki green. It's just kind of a nice, muted, pleasant color, I think. I like it.
Well, and I do like, in terms of color breakup, right, they're putting some badging, right, some nominations around the motor, and this brake lever cover and shroud, right, those protectors, you know, so I do like that they put some jewelry on it, if you will, so as to break up all just the grays and blacks here. I thought it was a nice touch, but yeah, it's different. I like it because of that. So yeah, it's interesting. I think it's one of the few bikes I've ever been on in my entire life where I think it wouldn't be nearly as hard to convince my wife to jump on with me and go for a ride.
Right.
Ordinarily, I'd get a firm no, I think. But yeah, overall, I don't know. I would give Zero high remarks. You know, kudos to the engineering team for what they put together. I don't really have anything negative to say other than if they want to ramp up the volumes. You know, I think there's definitely, given the breakup and the complexity that have going on in terms of number of parts, you know, the number of things that need to be assembled relative to one another, right? It doesn't look overly modular in terms of what could be done as a sub-assembly. It looks like often, you know, in some of these assemblies, there's a lot of stick-built stuff going on. But yeah, I think fundamentally it's a pretty nice bike.
This is a simple thing, but it actually is pretty nice, right? Like an adjustable windscreen. Other motorcycles have them, and some of them are electric. Some of them are a pain to use, so you don't use them. This one is just super easy, and depending on your speed, depending on your height, being able to adjust that on the fly so that you're not getting a bunch of buffeting around your helmet is pretty nice. We can talk about the range a little bit. You know, I think in city, Zero advertises 180 miles range, and on the freeway, maybe a little bit better than 100 or a little bit less than 100, depending on whether your freeway speeds are 55 or 70, and nobody's are 55, so it's a little under 100. We've been using this, me and a couple other people at Munro here, been using this primarily as a commuter bike with some freeway, but primarily city. And we've been averaging right around 120 to 130 miles on the range estimator, which kind of falls right in with what Zero would report for combined range. And we haven't seen any cases, you know, the battery range, the battery state of charge drops pretty linearly with mileage. There's no, it hangs somewhere and then drops like a rock and then freaks you out with range anxiety. Nobody's really experienced any of that. So that's all nice. It does have a couple of nice features. It has cruise control, which is pretty nice. It has heated grips, which we've had some frosty mornings here in Michigan, 48, 50 degree mornings. And even on low, they were plenty. I started out on medium and I had to turn them down. So I think it shines as a commuter vehicle for sure, which is what we've been using it as. You know, the question is as an adventure motorcycle, does it fit the description of an adventure motorcycle? And I think a lot of people have different descriptions of an adventure motorcycle, you know. Some people are gonna ride it on dirt roads on the weekends and that's their description of an adventure motorcycle and that's what they would like. And I think for that, it fits the description really well. I had it on quite a few dirt roads. They were hard packed. They had some hoopties and some washboards and some chuckies. They weren't smooth, but they were hard packed and it handled all of that great. I don't see any problems with dirt roads that are relatively hard packed. Possibly if they get a little more marbly, these Pirelli Scorpion trails might be a little sketchy, but those are tires. That's not the motorcycle, right? Tires are meant to be changed depending on where you're riding. I do have friends that, you know, they go out on these adventure motorcycle trips to Colorado or Tennessee or wherever they're going, and they ride all day, every day, and there's a dozen or 18 of them. So, you know, trying to keep a fleet of a dozen or 18 motorcycles charged in those type of rides, if that's your idea of adventure motorcycling, it might be tough in those environments to coordinate with a team of 12 or 18 people like that.
It may not be the one for you.
Might not be the one for you.
Yeah.
But those, I think those groups of guys are probably less frequent than the groups of guys that are going out in 2s or 3s or on shorter trips. So really just depends on what you're doing with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else to add, Thadd?
No, I enjoyed riding it. I'm still enjoying riding it.
Yeah.
Good luck getting this back, Zero.
All right, guys. Well, with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're interested in any other further information on the bike or anything else, just go ahead and reach out to us at sales@leandesign.com, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Thanks, Thadd.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.